So now I can see myself as well. So today is lawnmower day. So I'm sitting with my earphones here, and unfortunately it maybe cuts some of the noise outside for me, but you might be able to hear that. So apologies. So we've got a nice big group again today, and I think the last time I've seen this big group was probably in level 5 lockdown, as people started grappling with TERS and UIF, and unfortunately months later, it's still a very real issue. So just some background, the think tanks that I've been hosting since mid-March has to do with the impact of COVID-19 on HR specifically, well, and business in general. And TERS and uFiling has always been a struggle, and not every think tank has been about that, but most of the think tanks has been, and we do need to kind of understand the frustration around that. And although I don't deal with TERS and uFiling myself, because I'm hosting the think tanks, a lot of people, sometimes out of desperation, reached out to me, and hence at some stage I reached out to the minister, and we had the uFiling people participating. And then I saw in the media that the UIF commissioner said that they would want to close existing claims at the end of July, and fully realized that a lot of people are still struggling. I recommended that people reach out to NETLAG as the negotiating body for business, just to make sure that the UIF and the DEL understand that there are still outstanding issues. Let's forget for a moment the narrative out there that you know, the reason why people are not being paid is because of employers. I really wanted us to change that narrative. And absolutely the dead ends and the roadblocks that exist and the frustration that it caused, and absolutely the lack of trust that it resulted in between employers and employees because of this, and also the unresponsiveness and the ambiguity from the call center and the emails. So what happened is I also reached out to NETLAG, as I suggested other people do, and then that email circled to Natalie. So you know, hindsight is an exact science, but I wished our paths crossed sooner. So Natalie, thank you very much for being here. I do apologize. It seems like all the emails that I asked people to send to NETLAG circled to you. So you might have had a little bit more emails than you normally do. But thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Natalie can kind of fill in the gaps, but just high-level background. She is the business representative on the UIF, what they're dealing with the challenges. So she's fully aware, and a lot of things that I mentioned to her, she's fully aware of other people that's struggling with that as well. So she will be here to kind of share with what they know, what they are fully aware of, and some very practical tips how we can get around with some of those dead ends and roadblocks. So Natalie, I'm going to start with you. Just how we're going to do this is, I know that you're going to share a few slides that you have been helping with people before, and then whatever is not answered in those, we will have some opportunity for Q&A, as we always do. So over to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Liezel. And I see some familiar faces. Hi, Donna. Nice to see you. So thank you for the opportunity. Yes, as Liezel points out, I am a consultant with a business called Global Business Solutions. Our CEO, Jonathan Goldberg, has been very involved at NETLAG for many, many years. He's the business lead on the Labour Market Chamber. And of course, UIF and TERS fall squarely within that space. So right at the beginning of lockdown, we, like Liezel has been doing, kind of corralled for our clients to try and assist them with navigating. And in that process, of course, TERS became a pertinent issue. So for my sins, I was volunteered to lead the charge for that on behalf of our clients. And in this process also have now been escalated into the NETLAG space. And for the last 2 months, I'm part of the technical task team, which has been set up as an operational team, which constitutes the social partners. So myself from the business side, my colleague Martle Kaiser, who is representing Labour, and then technical officials from the UIF. So for the last it must be about a month now. We have daily meetings Monday to Friday at 10 a.m. And the intention really of those meetings is trying to unpack the issues, the operational issues that people are experiencing. It's had some successes and some frustrations, unfortunately, but we continue to move forward. I'm also involved now from a NEDLAC point of view in regards to escalating these further. So I do have some new news today. So you're probably the first group as a collective that will have information around the new direction and the calculation, which I'll share with you, but then also just hopefully to give you some practical guidance around some of the roadblocks that people are facing in this TERS journey. So I've put together a couple of slides. I'm just going to pull them up with your permission, and then we can take it from there. Hopefully it will answer some of your key questions as you have them, but very happy to open to the floor and to help wherever I can. So I think we're all fully aware of the drama that has been TERS, and I think most importantly, the frustration that employers have felt in that publicly, the UIF has been very quick to say that there are no backlogs. The Commissioner in particular, he actually forbid us from using that word backlog because he doesn't believe there's a backlog, but we push back and say 100% is a backlog. Anything that is a mountain of work that you haven't got through is a backlog by any definition. And that, you know, unfortunately what it's done is it's created a further divide between employers and employees at a time when we can least afford it as a country. So by all means, there are employers that haven't done everything that they should have done. And part of that, I think, is really comes down to a lack of understanding and a lack of clear communication from the UIF side. So really that's been part of my mission of the last, what's going on 4 months now, is really just trying to empower you to understand what is within your power to do so that as far as you can, you move your claims forward, and also to understand where you come to a point at which you cannot move any further, what are your options in regards to getting that sorted out. So I found this this picture of the keyboard, and I said if I had this key on my keyboard, I think it would have been rubbed out by now from having pressed it so much. Because that's how I feel most days with the UIF, and I suspect you do too. I'm supporting quite a lot of particularly payroll managers whose responsibility TERS has become because of the nature of the information that is being collated. And I think I'm going to have to set up a PA anonymous or a payroll anonymous just to deal with the trauma that most of these poor souls in payroll have had to go through, with the pushback coming from all sides, from employees and from line managers, who simply, I don't think, fully appreciate the frustration that the system has created and the constant changes that are happening. So these are the latest stats available. These come from the Department of Labour. They're shared with us on a daily basis, Monday to Friday, with regards to where we stand. What you can see, if you look at, I've just taken out some extracts from the report. You can see that there is, and this is one of our current challenges with them, is they've reconfigured their report so that the backlog is not quite so obvious. But if you look at how many applications were received, they're looking at about 885,000 applications, which are legal entities, not individuals, representing close on 10 million workers. So far, they've processed and paid 656,000 of those. So there's over 220,000 applications, which may have one employee or multiple or thousands of employees, which as yet have not been processed and paid. And to my understanding, the processed and paid does include companies who may have been partially paid, but where there are outstanding employees. They go on to break it down by the months, which you can see over here. And as one would expect, a very large number of employers applied for the hard lockdown period in April, when essentially our economy came to pretty much a grinding halt. In May, there were fewer applications, and the justification there is that some employers, of course, have gone back to work or partially gone back to work. And then in June, you can see a drastic reduction in the numbers. I'm not convinced that those numbers are accurate. I suspect some of the 200,000 that are kind of missing in action here fall into the May and June process. I'm aware of many of my clients having May applications just kind of been stuck at application in progress for what is now going on 2 months. So I'd be interested when we get to that point to understand from your side how many of you are in a similar position. The irony is that some of those clients have been paid for June, and yet May still is sitting without any movement at all. My greatest fear, and what is becoming more apparent to me, is that the system, which I think when we talk about a system coming from a business perspective, in our minds, we see a fairly sophisticated IT infrastructure, which is automating workflows and providing capacity, which is of course essential for this process given the sheer volumes of applications that are being dealt with. And yet I suspect they're actually dealing with a very fancy looking post box, and that in essence all that's happening, as opposed to submitting by email, we are now putting the data into the system, and yet it is still very reliant on the back end by manual processes and human intervention, which is why I think our expectations of processing and what the reality is are not meeting one another. If we look at other focus areas, which is where the UIF is paying employees directly, and those could be employees who made applications of their own volition because their employers didn't. And that's also an interesting thing. When lockdown first happened, they opened the opportunity for individuals to make applications on their own via the uFiling site. They then removed that. So there was only one period, and it is no longer available. And so individuals are required to go through the process of via their employer. Foreign nationals too are being paid, and they're listed separately because they are processed separately to others. And that number is something that has frightened the department, I think. I don't think they've realized the sheer volume of foreign nationals who are working within the country, and where we still are experiencing backlogs in payment. And that's largely related to the fact that foreign nationals cannot be processed via not just the TERS portal, but they cannot be processed by the CIPC system. So the CIPC system is essentially the database that the UIF uses to manage all declarations and to make records about you and I as contributors, and what kind of credits have been built up and what we've made claims on in our history. It works off of our ID number, which means that foreign nationals just simply don't feature in that process unless done manually. It's also the reason why eventually, after they got inundated with the requests, which were the original request was, if you were dealing with a foreign national, please resubmit a UR19 plus proof of payroll and declarations and send it to us via email and we'll process them. Right in the very beginning, we had some joy with the department making those processes work manually. They eventually got completely swamped and overwhelmed by email. And then you will have noticed that the automated response started coming back to you from those declarations, email addresses, pushing everybody to uFiling, which in itself created a whole nother drama in regards to the overcapacitation of the uFiling system and confusion for employers who had, up until that point, been doing e-declarations via their payroll systems. What I can tell you is that foreign nationals can only be paid if they are manually processed, and which is not happening currently via email through the UIF, or by logging into the uFiling system and declaring them again. So unfortunately, as frustrating as the uFiling system is, if you have foreign nationals that require payment, your only option is to go via uFiling, to redeclare them filing. They will then be synced between the uFiling system and the CIPC system, and they will get processed. And I have had success in getting foreign nationals processed in that way. If we look at the breakdown in regards to the various periods, so April, May, and June running down the right-hand side, you can see that the department is still paying out for April. They're also still paying out for May and for June as well. So June, we working great guns actually, because although it says the 1st to the 25th of July, they actually only really started making payments from about the 16th or 17th of June, well, July for June. Whereas May went into hiatus for a long period of time, as did April. So we are seeing payments happening on a regular basis. They have, because they are behind, also instituted pay runs twice a day. So they are processing payments in the morning and again in the afternoon, which we have seen help to move things forward. I think as frustrating as this process has been, what we do have to acknowledge and recognize is that this TERS process would not have been possible without the strong arguments and support that business, organized business and organized labor put pressure on government to do this. Because technically, they've never ever dealt with mass employer-led applications before. Most people that are being applied for are in fact still employed, and in fact that's the point. They're trying to preserve jobs and to avoid retrenchments. And we cannot deny that what is 35 billion rand, pretty much, has been injected into the economy that would otherwise not have been there. So for all that it has been frustrating, it is a great success and certainly a great help to the economy, to individual employees, and of course to businesses as well. We also know that as frustrating as it's been for the department, they are seriously undercapacitated, and it's not for lack of trying that they are behind. I regularly get emails, including from the UI Commissioner, which are coming through into my inbox, and they were written and submitted in the middle of the night, literally. So they are doing all that they can. I think what is frustrating, and certainly from my point of view, having been involved at the bilateral, is that where opportunities do present themselves for us to actually talk about things before they do them, they don't seem to be interested in taking that feedback until it's almost too late. So a prime example is this issue of the CIPC verification, which we highlighted to them as a good thing, because we know that there's been a very public outcry around the fraud that has happened within the system. And so the verification of ownership of bank accounts was a critical step in the process, which arguably should have been done right up front, but which nevertheless has now been brought in. The challenge, of course, is we're dealing with individuals who, for the most part, have never been exposed to business. And so don't think about things like the fact that not all businesses are structured in a way that would require them to be registered with the CIPC. They could be a not-for-profit, a trust, a partnership, a school, a club, a collection of individuals in a stokvel. I mean, there could be any number of different entities which don't necessarily have a CIPC number, and which has created another problem in the system in that it doesn't accommodate for them and is adding more complexity and more delay. I'd like to just first start off by talking about the extension. So we were all very excited when the department announced the extension, which essentially is an extension of 6 weeks up until the 15th of August. What is important to understand is that as yet, there is no legal basis upon which that extension can be effected, which is why they have not opened the July period. The old directive under which we were operating has lapsed and no longer exists. And so what is being drafted currently is not an amendment to the previous directive, but in fact an entirely new, and what actually should be termed a direction rather than a directive, although we've all come to use those terms. What they've done in this new direction in its draft format, and this is what is currently being negotiated and finalized by the social partners, the intention is to have it signed off this evening tomorrow evening, so that it can be approved by the department's internal structures and ultimately gazetted by the minister, hopefully by the end of the week, is that they have wanted to very specifically reference who the extension applies to, under what conditions, and also to clarify around the calculation. So about 8 weeks ago, when May first started getting paid out, I noticed that what the department was paying out was not what I understood they should be paying out as per the previous directive and the UIF calculator, which had been distributed to business. And I've been raising it for all this time. We've been battered around a little bit by the UIF, and eventually we sought to get legal clarity, which was given by Hilton Cheadle, Professor Hilton Cheadle, who in fact is one of the architects of the Labour Relations Act, and is the advisor to the department. He concurred with my interpretation and our understanding, and also advised that the department had not been making calculations. It affects a very specific group of people, and we'll talk about it when we get there, but they had been underpaying essentially. The department still disagrees with us, and we're going to have to determine how we fight that fight. And I'd like to, again, when we get to that point, perhaps just ask you to indicate whether you have noticed and been affected by this yourselves. But what it has meant is that we've become very clear, and in our negotiations over the last 2 days in particular, around ensuring that how we define the calculations for the new period is without any possibility of misinterpretation between business, labor, and the UIF. And it does mean a fundamental change. So it's very important that coming out of today, you're aware of what that is. So if we look essentially at who will be covered by the extension, very obviously in 2.2.1, any business or industry or sector that is not permitted by regulation to commence operations, either fully or in part, is covered. So that would be people like gyms who are not allowed to open, liquor stores who are currently also banned from opening, taverns who are not allowed to operate. It would also cover, for example, hospitality sector, where although they could technically partially be open for business travel, but not for leisure, or a conferencing center who may technically have a conference of up to 50 people, probably not operating at full capacity. And the same with restaurants, where restaurants can technically open, but as we know, they're limited in terms of how many tables can be accommodated. They're not selling any alcohol, which puts a great dent in terms of operational return on investment, and where they also have to close and be limited in their hours, it's likely that they are only partially open. Any of those sorts of businesses would be very clearly covered by the extension. The other group of individuals who would be covered, but who would be applied for by the employer, are individuals who are defined by the Occupational Health and Safety Direction as being a vulnerable employee. So those are employees who are over the age of 60, those who have any of the listed comorbidities that places them at greater risk of potentially becoming very ill under COVID-19 should they contract it, women who are pregnant, and certainly those that are more than 26 weeks pregnant. Those would all be vulnerable employees who, if the employer is unable to accommodate them, either in the first and preferred instance from letting them work from home, or taking any other precautions, which could be additional PPE, an alteration of their working hours, working conditions, working areas. If they cannot be accommodated, then they would be covered under this TERS extension. 2.2.3 is written quite widely, which of course from a business perspective is good news. However, I do caution here that employers consider carefully who they apply for and under what motivation. So the direction says that anybody who is unable to, so employees who are not able to be fully utilized, so partially utilized or not fully utilized because of operational requirements of the business, which could be economic, technological, structural, etc., because the employers compliance with the regulations, their customers' compliance with the regulations, etc., could be covered by the TERS. And they give examples of things like reduced work hours, change in shift patterns, short time, rostering, etc. In our conversations, the department and various officials have on several occasions made reference to evidence or proof that they might request. I'm not sure whether this will be as part of the application process or as part of the auditing process. But again, here it's interpreted quite widely, but I think you need to be cautioned again in saying, well, who would you apply for? So in our business at Global Business, we're a labor law consultancy, HR consultancy, but a big part of what we do is training, conferencing and events. We were hugely affected, as I think a lot of HR businesses were, when lockdown happened. And we continue to be affected by the fact that we cannot run public workshops. We cannot realistically run in-house training for our clients. And so the training business has taken an enormous hit over the last 4 months. As a result, anybody in our business who is linked to training is likely to be suffering from a loss of income, a loss, etc. Those are people who could realistically be covered under the TERS over the last few months. But if we're looking at going into this extended period, as we start to shift into a more virtual space, as we start to see more of our clients returning to work, and where there is an increased desire to conduct training, whether virtually or in person, we would then have to really look and say, do we legitimately qualify to apply for TERS? And I think as a business, we would, but not necessarily all of the employees in our business. So we'd have to look individually per employee and say, okay, so I'm a facilitator part-time. So my facilitation is certainly down, but I'm very busy with TERS. And so although I'm working from home, I'm fully occupied. And so it would not be correct for GBS to apply for me. The same would be said, for example, of Jonathan Goldberg, who's just run very successful mid-year labour law updates, which although were virtual, are very successful. However, we do have colleagues in our business who cannot perform their duties. We're all working remotely, so our cleaning staff, our reception staff are unable to perform their duties. They very definitely could be incorporated. We have some individuals in our business who have comorbidities and whose ability to work and earn is also compromised. And they would be people that we could, as a business, apply for. So it's not an all or nothing. You would have to look individually going forward at who qualifies and then make the decision about making an application. All indications thus far is that this extension period is going to be treated as a single application for the purposes of TERS, which I think is good news from the sense that it's one process, one set of opening. They're talking about the 3rd of August, which is next week, Monday. I personally don't believe it's going to happen because I don't think they're going to be ready from an ICT point of view. They have to wait for the directive to be gazetted. And again, we've seen in the past, even if they open on the 3rd, I know that we generally experience some wobbles on the system every time they roll into a new period, whether it's data breaches or access issues, downtime. So I think we all just do need to be prepared. I think we want to be ready. We want to have our data ready so that when it opens, we can confidently and quickly apply. But I'm not sure that we're actually going to see it go live on the 3rd. That's from their side, but we've asked them to please give a formal communication to market as soon as possible. If we just look at a very important point, and Liezel mentioned it when she started, the department is adamant that they are going to close the period of April and May at the end of the month, and that is Friday, the 31st of July. They have also said that they will honor any existing applications in the system, even though the periods for application will close. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to stop new applications for those old periods being entered into the process. And it makes sense because we can't be on a never, never. What is concerning to us as business is we are aware of employers who do not have access to their profiles, either because somebody else has, and often it ends up being an employee who right in the beginning was able to go online and set themselves up, not, I don't think, to commit fraud, but just to make a claim for themselves, and who have now essentially blocked that UIF number on the TERS portal. We are aware of some employers who are still struggling to have their password unblocked or changed. If you are in that boat, please note that you need to urgently, and I think Liezel's already shared that with you and probably how we ended up together, you need to declare a dispute. And I'm going to talk to you about how you do that. I don't believe an email is sufficient. It goes into a black hole. So I think it needs to be a very formal declaration that is placed on record if you have not been able to make those applications. Because although they talk about an appeals process, I have yet to see an appeals process. Our requests for indication on how that appeals process is going to work have not yet provided us with anything concrete. If you are still waiting, please don't wait. You need to, between now and Friday, make your applications. I know that some employers have assumed that unless they've been able to be paid for April, they can't move to May. It's not true. You can move, so please do. So essentially what's going to happen is when you try and move forward, it's going to ask you for certain information. It's going to ask you again for your bank confirmation letter. It's going to ask you for that signed UIF acceptance letter. I've just put a little screenshot there for you. It's the one that automatically downloads when you go into the payment screen. If you haven't got a payment screen yet, please don't hesitate. Drop me a line. I'll send you this letter. And then they want proof of payment. And I think this is where most of us have kind of gone, well, I haven't got proof of payment, so I can't submit it. It's just a document. I don't even know if anybody reads it on the other side. So what I strongly recommend is that if you don't have proof of payment, then what you need to do is on a company letterhead, you need to write a letter with your UIF number and explain that you've applied and that nothing's happened, or that you're still waiting, and that you don't want to be prejudiced from not making claims for the future periods, and that you commit to honoring the MOA and paying your employees as soon as you receive the money. You won't obviously need to upload a proof of refund to the UIF if you haven't been paid, and that's not a compulsory section. So do that and then make your claim for the May and I would say June periods as well as you require. I'd also just like to, at this point in time, also point out that you are obligated under the MOA and that letter that you sign and attach, that you will send the department proof of payment via email. So I think many of us have fallen into the trap of believing, well, because I'm uploading it onto the system, my apologies, I don't need to send it to the department, but it is a requirement. So again, I'm not sure whether they are reading the stuff or what's happening to it, but please just do everything that you can on your side to uphold your end of the bargain. So what you need to send is proof of payment. And for those of you, particularly I think for the April period, where many employers had committed to employees to covering their full salaries, most of it in lieu of leave or leave that was advanced, and you've therefore applied for TERS, credited the employee the leave, and kept the TERS money to put essentially back into your leave accrual provision for when the employee takes it into future. You need to be able to prove to the department what you've done. So you should have some form of reconciliation that shows that Natalie took 5 days of leave. Those 5 days of leave in her normal daily rate equate to whatever, 6,000 Rand. And she got 6,000 Rand from the department, which we've offset against those 5 days, and we've credited her with that money. You should also have communicated that to your employees. So again, what we've done with our clients is we helped in building a template. We recommended they use a mail merge to make life easy, looking it up off of their spreadsheets. But every employee needs to have a clear understanding that you applied for them. This is how much was paid to them, what was due to them, and what happened to that. So how has it benefited them? Because it is a benefit for employees and not a benefit for employers. That's the email address, COVID-19 post-payment inquiries, where all of this information has to be submitted. The most recent challenge has been the issue around the CIPC verification. So what has happened is they asked for the CIPC numbers. As I mentioned, it didn't make allowance for people who didn't have a CIPC number, except that you could add an ID number. What they're trying to do here, and it wasn't clear in the instruction, is they want to verify the ownership of the bank account. So companies who are using a centralized payroll account, for example, within a group structure, so it's a single account linked to multiple UIF reference numbers, and where those CIPC numbers don't correlate, they will have failed the bank verification. What they need is they need confirmation of ownership of account. So as of this morning in our UI meeting, they told us that they have 65,000 entities that have failed bank validation and who are currently sitting in a situation where they cannot proceed. You can't upload, you can't do anything on the back end until that verification process has completed. However, we also do know, and this is by the UIF's own admission, that the third-party verification company they used, and in fact it's a bank, has failed people who, according to the system, and this again correlates with what we know from our clients, where the CIPC numbers do align. So there should be no reason for the failure, and yet there is a failure. They have told us today that they're going to come up with a plan and that all of those that are right will be released. So my recommendation at this point in time, other than trying to have an enormous amount of patience, is that you need to just go in, double check that the CIPC number on the bank confirmation letter, so whatever your bank account is that you're using, the bank confirmation letter includes your CIPC number. Check that that is the same as the CIPC number you've entered into the system. And as of Wednesday last week, they did open the ability to edit that field, which was previously not editable. So you can go and then you can update it. If all of those things align, and the same for your sole proprietor, it'll be the ID number of the bank account holder. If all of those things align, all you need to do is wait. Don't make any further changes, just be patient and wait. If you're an MPO or a trust or a partnership, the suggestion is that you contact your bank to find out which of your signatories is linked to that account as the primary account holder, and then use that ID number as the one that you would enter. So what would happen is you would pick, no, we're not registered with the CIPC. That then allows you to enter in a 13-digit ID number, and you need to enter in the ID number that ideally will be picked up as being the primary account holder with your bank. So that's the best suggestion that I can give at this particular time in regards to the CIPC issues. The other primary problem for many companies is that they have been flagged as being under assessment by the risk unit. According to Tsepiso Matsapane, who's the Chief Inspector of Risk, 12,000 entities have been flagged for assessment. 79 bank accounts in particular have been identified as risk because they have multiple UIF reference numbers attached. They're obviously aware of what they call low risk accounts, which are bargaining councils, trade unions, those third parties who have a formal MOU with the UIF to act on behalf of their employers or members. And those should be released imminently. We were told this last week, Friday, and our understanding was that they would all be released for today, or in fact yesterday even, but it hasn't happened according to my trade union colleagues. But we do hope that that will happen imminently. As I said, for groups who have a single account, what you need to do, please, is you need to send on a letterhead, signed ideally by the financial director or managing director, CEO, somebody at a senior level in the business, on a company letterhead explaining the group structure. So how does is the group structured? Which are the associated UIF reference number entities? Include their CIPC numbers if they have their own unique CIPC numbers, and then explain why you have a single account. So is it a centralized payroll account? Some companies went as per the original request and set up a special account for TERS. So what is the single account? What are the single account's details? And confirming that all payments for those UIF numbers should be paid into that account, and then attach the confirmation, bank confirmation letter for the account, and then send it please to tsepiso.matapane@labour.gov.za, because he is the gentleman who's currently going through this process. Once they verify that, it should lift the risk assessment off of all of those UIF numbers and enable you to proceed. Other reasons that an entity could be flagged for assessment include where there is a deceased employee coming up on your records. Sadly, we do know that some people have died in this process. We are talking about 4 months later. We also talking about a pandemic, a health pandemic. So there could be a legitimate case where I applied for a person who was very much alive at the time I applied and who has unfortunately passed away in the interim. In those cases, those people should be removed from your claim. You may not be able to physically delete them yourself, but please just make sure that you've got evidence or, you know, proof of death on your side. We also are aware that some people are coming up as being deceased, and this is according to the Home Affairs database, and yet they are living, breathing people in front of you. There is a question, of course, around whether that is a mistake on the Home Affairs side, or whether it is possible that the individual who is presenting themselves with that ID number has not got a fraudulent ID number. So we concur that those should be investigated. Our primary issue is that it will place your entire claim on hold, even if you only have one person. And according to Mr. Matapane, until they have until the Home Affairs changes that person from deceased, they will consider it to be suspicious. So if you have any of those and you know that you've got those under your declined list, please engage with those individuals and ask them to go to the Home Affairs and deal with it. You might in the interim just want to get an affidavit from them that they are in fact this person, so that you're prepared for when the department contacts you. They keep telling us that they will contact every employer, but most employers that I've spoken to are yet to hear from the department and are still having question marks around why they've been placed under potential risk. If any come up as having invalid IDs, now again, please just triple check. We know that during the CSV process, and it particularly affects individuals who were born in the 2000 year or in the 2000s year. I mean, it's quite scary to think that they're in the workplace, but the CSV process tends to drop the zeros from the front of the ID numbers. And that's often why they come up as having invalid IDs. We do also know, unfortunately, that there are individuals in our workplaces who have potentially provided fraudulent information to us. So we need to, in the first instance, check that we haven't made any finger errors in capturing. And if there are issues, then we need to investigate them. We know too that many have come up as having active claims. And this is seen as a potential fraud risk because the department in their minds is seeing that an employer is applying for someone who's already receiving benefits. Again, we're fully aware that in most cases, those are not actually active claims. They are long ago claims which have yet to be closed on the department side. So again, prepare yourself in getting the details of those individuals. When was their claim? Often it's maternity. In one case, the lady's child is already 9 years old. When did they return to work? And you've got proof of all of that. Scarily, the other thing that flags you for assessment is if one of the employees under your account has phoned and complained to the call center. So that is worrisome because again, it's not necessarily that there is any kind of fraud, but that potentially, you know, that there's just been a delay in payment, which is also not necessarily your fault. Sorry, they're banging outside. I just want to close the window. My apologies. So that you're not hearing the banging. And then, as we said, we are asking and continue to ask them to provide communication to employers, and we hope that this will be forthcoming. We agreed at today's NEDLAC meeting that the risk gentleman should join the NEDLAC meeting tomorrow and provide an update on how long this process is going to take and what the timelines and turnaround is, because that for me is, I think, the biggest concern, is that until that risk is lifted, no payments will happen for past, current, or future applications for any individuals. So what are some of the comments? I know many are frustrated, and this is the department's famous line when they go to market, is that the reason people haven't been paid is because companies haven't been declaring. I do know that there are some employers who were not aware of the requirement to declare and had assumed that if they were paying their UIF contributions to SARS, that was all that was needed. There is a second step in the process which is critical, and that is to declare the individuals and what the individual contributions to UIF are, And that is done mostly via payroll declaration. So if you've got any kind of payroll software, they generally have a very simplified process, which on a monthly basis, you make your submission, you send it via email, generally straight out of the system, and that lodges the e-declaration. For smaller employers, you would go via the uFiling route, and where you would manually upload your file once a month. But uFiling, by its admission by the Interfile team who develop and maintain the system, was never intended to be used by large employers. So it's typically employers of domestic staff members who go on and register their employees and who pay, for example, a year's worth of UIF in one go because of the small values. Alternatively, up to sort of 100 employees. Any other larger employers are generally doing eDecs. What we do know too is that even some employers who've been doing eDecs, there have been some issues in the file. So what has happened is that possibly you've got some employees who have been paid and you can't understand why others haven't been paid on the same payroll. Please just go and have a check. It might be that there's a little error in the file, a space is correct in somewhere, a formatting issue, which has resulted in those individuals not being declared. Mr. Sharkit Lala was part of our discussions last week. He heads up the e-declarations, and what his recommendation is that even if you have done eDecs, if you are seeing people not coming up, go back into your payroll system and just resubmit. So go back and resubmit the declarations for those periods, but please do just double check, and I've seen this specifically in groups where there are multiple UIF numbers. Please check that individuals are associated with the correct payroll and the correct UIF numbers, because what has happened in many cases is that the individuals have been declared against the wrong UIF number. So they've been applied for on TERS under the correct divisional UIF number, but of course they're not being recognized under CIA against that number. So we just need to triple check that that's all correct. If you need to go on to uFiling, and for foreign nationals, as I mentioned earlier, that is what you have to do. You have to go and declare them on uFiling if you want them to be paid. Please just note that if you do eDecs, you don't have to register as a new employer. And that's where I think most people have gone wrong. And again, I get frustrated because this is something that I learned myself only last week when Mr. Lala informed me of this. And I thought, really, they could have just helped employers by telling them this up front. So when you do eDecs, your UIF number will automatically be registered, in inverted commas, in the back end of uFiling. So what you rather need to do is you need to register as a user, and you have to use a member of the CC or a director of the company's details. You register as a user, and once you've registered as a user, you can associate the UIF number with your individual user account. And then you would only need to declare the foreign nationals, and you can do that as a bulk upload, which is not limited to 100. Once they're declared on the back end, it does a sync every 2 or 3 days, and they should then be paid. I have had success with foreign nationals who haven't been paid for extensive periods, and where once they were finally resolved with uFiling, it went back and picked up all 3 of the previous payments, paid them. It didn't pay them one lump sum, it paid them 3 separate times, but within close succession to one another, days literally. And then when June came around, they got paid together with all their other colleagues. ID not found, again, relates to the fact that either it's a foreign national or there's a problem with the ID number. So please just triple check the ID number because that's why they would come up as. We know some have been rejected on the basis that they say they don't qualify for the benefit. So it will say something along the lines of salary received during lockdown is equal to or greater than the monthly remuneration. So my question is why? Because if that person earned their full salary, you shouldn't be claiming for them. If it's not their full salary and it includes loans, advances, leaves, ex gratia payments, please go back into the system and change what you've declared as leave income. You must only declare remuneration for work performed, nothing else. So not an advance, not leave, not a goodwill gesture from the employer. So if I worked, and I worked for, maybe I'm on a short time, but I worked 2 days a week,
you declare the money for the 2 days a week, and that's all you declare. And that's absolutely critical because it will have a bearing on how your benefit is calculated. The other thing we saw in May is we saw suddenly people getting paid less or nothing at all with an error code that said settlement of overpayment. And that's because they've gone back and they've looked at what you said the person earned in April. So if you were one of those who in April had declared that you'd paid people in full because it included leave, and you never went back and changed it, it's now gone back and said, oh dear, we shouldn't have paid this person because they didn't qualify for a benefit. And it's trying to claw it back. So that's a really critical thing, is that in the first period, and I think that lulled many employers into a false sense of comfort, is that they totally ignored the remuneration received column. And the reason they did that is because there was so much confusion about, you know, do we claim leave or don't we claim leave? And the amendment to the directive, which allowed companies to apply and then credit people for leave, came in quite late. So that's generally why that settlement of overpayment will have existed. We know that there are bank account verification challenges too, and this is unrelated to the CIPC issue. And this is where if you haven't used a universal branch code, it will struggle with bank account verification. The other area where it will be difficult, and this makes it quite problematic if you've chosen pay to employee, is that if your employee's account is not in their name, it's going to fail bank account verification. So if you've got individuals who've got a joint account with their spouse, or whether they're getting paid into their mom's account or their brother's account or a friend's account, they will not be able to pay it into their own account. So my suggestion on those cases is if the individual doesn't have a bank account in their own name, it would make far more sense for you to go back in, change those banking details to pay to employer so that they can pay to you and you can pay to the individual. We are also aware of some technical issues with the system, which continue to be problematic. They are a little bit erratic, so they don't necessarily affect everyone. But CSV file uploads can be problematic, and again, in some cases, have no explanation. I've checked the CSV files and I cannot for the life of me see anything wrong. But I also regularly get employers who tell me that the file is correct and they can't upload it. And when they send it to me, immediately I can see problems. So you can't look at the file in CSV format. What you must do is you must follow that process the department gave us right in the beginning. So save it to CSV, then open the file in Notepad. Look at it there. If it contains incorrect date formats, if it contains spaces behind the names or in front of the names, if it contains more than 2 decimal points in the figures, if those figures were entered as rand or accounting format instead of in number format, it's going to be problematic. So you need to just go in and triple check that there aren't any little funnies that have crept in. And that's sometimes why, you know, you upload a CSV and a handful of employees don't get uploaded. And it might be in their lines, there was some problem, and so it didn't pick them up. The other issue, which remains something that is very concerning to me, and yet we don't have a resolution for, is that people go missing. So what happens is they're in the system, because if you try and re-enter them, or you look them up by ID, you can see they're in the system, but they're not attached to your portal and your UIF number. So some of you might recall when we did the rollover into June, we had all those data breach issues where, you know, you log in and suddenly you can see other people's information. And that's essentially what does happen in some cases, and where individuals have suddenly become allocated to someone else's profile. So we've reported these on numerous occasions with very specific examples, and unfortunately they haven't yet been resolved. So I've got one instance with a client where we've inherited a lady. She's suddenly sitting on our client's declined list, and she will be on our declined list because she doesn't exist to this business, and she can't be paid because they can't pick her up. But we don't know where she belongs. She doesn't have any contact information that allows us to contact her. And I feel terrible because I think she's sitting there unpaid, and her employer is probably wondering where on earth she's gone, because they can't re-add her because she exists in the system. With that same client, we had somebody who was paid in April and May, and when we rolled over to June, she's just disappeared. She's somewhere in the system because we can't re-add her, but we don't know where she's gone. So if you've got those issues, I am in the process of collating all of them into a single submission to the ICT guy. So please do let me know if you've got some of those challenges as well. Okay, and then calculation feedback. I don't want to spend too much time on this other than to say that, like I said, I picked up an error which affected May and which I think will affect June, and it affects specifically people who earn between 3,500 and 8,000 Rand a month. And where the department's calculator, and it only affects individuals who had some income declared. So if they had 0 income declared on the portal, then there was no problem. Their payout happened with no issue. But where individuals had some income paid to them, suddenly their benefit was reduced so that the benefit plus what they earned came to the 3,500, which is not correct. So Halton Cheadle, as I said, put together a memorandum which clearly unpacked that and said, to his legal understanding, it says that the benefit payable should be no less than 3,500. So not the salary, the benefit payable. And when we looked at the rules that are being implemented on the back end from a calculation point of view, rules 5 and 7, which particularly affect that category of worker, were deemed to be inconsistent with the directive and invalid. And we maintain that the department should fix that and that they should rerun those calculations so that affected individuals are not unduly prejudiced. I'm not sure how we're going to go on that because the UIF pushes back and says that that's not their understanding, wasn't the intention, and it's become a backwards and forwards issue. We're actually looking at the moment for a real case with a client. Bowman's, who is part of the team with us, is willing to take that case on legally and to set a precedent. So if anybody here is feeling particularly brave and has some examples, I'd be very grateful. But that's about fixing the past. But what it does mean is that as we're moving into this new period, it became absolutely essential to ensure that we're all on the same page and that we don't have any misunderstanding or misinterpretation. So what it does mean going forward is it means that for this extension period, there is no minimum benefit of 3,500. So that has a material impact on what somebody would be eligible to receive from the department. So what it means is, whereas our understanding is certainly in April it was applied, but when they changed the calculator on the 23rd of May, it rerouted how it was calculating. It also, I believe, contributed to the overpayment story. But that's, as I say, we're fighting that fight about the past, but now it's about making sure that we're all on the same page going forward. So essentially what the new wording will say, and we haven't seen the final draft of the wording, as I said, we've had the principal agreement, and now we wait on Professor Cheadle to draft. But essentially what it means is that the first step in the process is the department will calculate in accordance with the UI sliding scale, and that fancy long calculation, I've just given you the example here, is what is the benefit. And as I think we're all familiar with now, the cap of the salary, the uppermost cap, is that the benefit will be calculated a maximum of a salary of 17,712 a month, which means for a 30-day period, 6,638 Rand and 33 cents. So that's the maximum benefit payable. If we were looking at someone who earned 4,000 Rand a month, for example, their benefit for a 30-day period will be 1,928 Rand and 70 cents. The second step is to say, what is the income loss for a period? So if somebody has earned nothing, then they would be entitled to the full benefit. If somebody has earned something in the period for part-time work, so they've been on short time, for example, or they're working from home and their employers therefore reduce their salary because they said that they are not as productive as they would be in the office, for argument's sake, then what would happen is we would say, let's test whether when we add the benefit to what the person earned, that they don't end up in a better position than they would otherwise have been. So if we use the example of someone who earns 20,000 Rand a month, they would be available to receive the maximum 6,638 Rand. If that individual worked and they earned 10,000 Rand, for example, they would be entitled to the full 6,600, because that, when added to 10, is still less than 20. If that person was someone who was working and the company had instituted salary cuts, for example, as part of operational requirements, and they were only earning 15,000 Rand, 20, they wouldn't be entitled to the full 6,600, because if we added that to 15, it would put them in a better position. So their benefit would then be limited to essentially the 5,000 Rand income loss that they suffered, because the 5 plus the 15 would take them to 20. The only difference is on the low end. The department wants to ensure that no one takes less than 3,500 in total. So what that means is that if somebody in this example in my table was a 3,000 Rand a month earner, for example, and they would only qualify then for 1,504 Rand and 20 cents benefit. If they had no earnings for the period, the department would automatically increase their benefit value to the 3,500, well, that 3,44539, basically, the 3,500, the minimum wage. If the person was a 3,000 Rand a month worker and they earned 1,000 Rand, then what would happen is the department would work out, if we add their 1,000 Rand to the benefit, does it still leave them too low? Yes, 2.5. So they would pay an additional 1,000 Rand to get them to the 3.5. I hope this is making sense to everybody. So there isn't going to be a minimum 3,500 benefit payout. And I think what is very frustrating to us is the fact that, of course, last week, Friday, was payroll day, and the very public announcements by the Deputy Minister of Labour was that the extension would be on the same conditions and terms. And I just hope that not too many employers have gone out and made payments in advance to employees on the basis of the minimum 3,500, because I'm pretty confident that that's not going to actually transpire. I'm nearly at the end of the slides, and I can see there's questions coming, and then we can have a conversation. I want to just point out to everybody, and it's now our strong recommendation. In fact, I've got my colleague Andine, who's a labour attorney. She and I are in the process of drafting some standard dispute documentation and helping to process flow, you know, the timelines and costs associated with taking this forward. But it seems like no amount of contacting the UIF, sending letters, including to the Commissioner, is having much traction. Many employers still sit with multitudes of issues and no action. We've eventually got one client who's taken the Minister to court for failure to act. And one of the things that was raised during that process was, well, have you gone through the dispute resolution mechanism? So we are of the opinion now that if you are one of those employers who has done everything that you need to do, and you are reliant on the department in doing something that they're supposed to do, and they haven't done it, and they haven't responded to your requests for explanation about why not, or they just simply are not doing it, that it's time that we actually all started lodging disputes, because maybe then the department will take it seriously. So in essence, in the memorandum of agreement, which we all agree to when we go through this TERS process, it says in clause 28 that if there is any dispute in relation to the agreement or the performance under the agreement by the parties, so the parties is us as employers and the UIF, then the duly authorized senior officials of each party, so someone from the UIF and someone from your business, shall meet within 5 days, or such period as the parties may agree, from the date on which the dispute was notified in writing by one party to the other, with the attempt to resolve the dispute amicably. Failing which, if the dispute is not resolved, then the parties will take it forward via the Arbitration Foundation of South Africa. So whilst we really do hope that the disputes don't have to result in further action beyond this. What we really do hope is that the dispute will at least kick the UIF into action, into engaging with you individually as an employer determining what the holdups are with your claims and doing what they're supposed to do, process the claim and pay out the benefits. So that is a very strong recommendation that we have to clients now. If you have exhausted all avenues on your side, is just lodge the dispute. Send the dispute letter that formally notifies the department that you are calling in your rights under clause 28 and that you want them to engage with you within the 5 days to determine where to from here. So again, if anybody is interested in finding out more or seeing how we can help, I would gladly do that. Just for your interest, I've included, I'm not going to spend too much time, but for those businesses who are not yet fully up to speed, whether for operational requirements or by directive and regulation, once C19 TERS is over, which as of now will be the 15th of August, which is only 2 weeks away, what are your options? So your options are beyond retrenchment, which we really hope we can avoid. We are dealing with so many retrenchments via our HR practice, and it's disheartening terribly, is reduced work time. So reduced work time would be via the normal UIF channels, and fundamentally the key differences, which is what I've put into this table, is that reduced work time would go back to looking at how much credit an individual had built up, whereas TERS has been independent of that. And fundamentally different is that benefits cannot be added to what somebody has earned unless what they've earned is significantly less. So essentially, if we use our example of someone who's a 20,000 Rand a month earner, if that 20,000 Rand a month earner, their benefit is the 6.8 or the 668. If they earn during reduced work time anything more than 6.8, they're entitled to no benefit under reduced work time. So essentially, it creates a very small window, and only certain employees or those who have a severely reduced income who would actually qualify for benefits. The other key issue is that it's an employee-led application, not an employer-led application. And currently there is no way to do it online via uFiling. What we do know is that where there are multiple employees affected on a particular site, the UIF is willing to send someone from the department to your premises and to assist in a bulk application in engaging with those individuals. It also has a lot more paperwork, and several of those forms need to be completed by you as the employer. So even though you won't be able to actually apply on, on behalf of the employee like we've done under TERS, you will still need to be instrumental in supporting your employees in collecting the information necessary for them to be able to apply. The other critical piece of information you need to understand is that for as long as the individual's ID is associated in the TERS portal awaiting payment for benefits, they will not be eligible to be helped under normal UI benefits. And that's just how the system works. And it's because they don't want to have a situation where someone is potentially claiming more, double benefits. The fact that they're for different periods, unfortunately, just can't be catered for in the system. So again, very frustrating because you've got a situation where we're so far behind with TERS. But if you've got people who are waiting on TERS payments, my strong recommendation is that you delay them going for reduced work time until such time as TERS is paid out, at which point in time you can deactivate them from TERS so that they can be reactivated on normal UI benefits. If you give them a letter that says that they qualify for reduced work time and they're no longer on TERS, any outstanding payments due to that person will not be paid via TERS. So you've got to kind of pick your lane and go for it. The other thing, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, it may or may not be applicable, but there is also the normal TERS, which is something that's been around for a long time. It's via the CCMA. And essentially, this is a scheme which is specifically directed at companies which are in financial distress and where the SETA in the sector partners with the Department of Labor and the employer to avoid retrenchment, and where during short time periods supplement salaries via the the Department of Labour, and where the CETA also would then fund training, which is intended to upskill those individuals to add greater value to the business where they are currently employed, or potentially to provide them with skills to enable them, should retrenchment happen, to have better chance of a new job elsewhere. It is a lot more complicated in terms of the process, the application, the information, but for anybody that is interested, we do have, and it's a complimentary toolkit, which is available if you're interested in getting information. If you need further specialist assistance, my colleague Kim Smalley is specially focused and does assist our clients with applications. But I just thought I'd share that because, you know, we're all obviously happy about the extension, but as has happened with most of the TERS, we're kind of working in arrears. So we're quickly heading into the next period of time where only half of the April salary is potentially going to be covered via TERS, and you may need to think about alternatives. So yeah, a lot of information, hopefully not too much information overload in one go, but hopefully stuff that helps to clarify some of your questions. And yeah, so I don't know, Liezel, how you normally do it, whether you want to facilitate the questions or if I should just read them via chat, but I'm happy to take questions.
If I unmute myself, I think what would work well is, rather than me voicing over some of the questions in the chat box, I've picked up from experience, it's actually going to be quicker if you throw your eye over that.
Sure, no problem.
And just kind of bottom line, because also I'm looking at the time that we kind of bottom line maybe answers to some of that, and I'm quite sure some of those questions you've already answered. And then once you've done that, we can maybe ask people that's got additional questions just to drop their mics or they start their videos, and they're welcome then to also ask specific questions. So Natalie, just while you're throwing your eye over there, I can see you can multitask, you can read and you can listen. Thank you for the context and also very practical advice. And yes, it is a lot, but one thing that I've realized is that the magnitude of problems, it's vast. You know, some people are struggling with password resets and not getting into the TERS system. Some people are struggling with file uploads. So some people are struggling with communication, etc. So there is a magnitude of places where people can get stuck. So those roadblocks and dead ends. So thank you for sharing so much, I think, information so far. So I'm going to hand back to you. Looking at the chat box.
Yes, so I see from John T. Hi, John T. We chatted yesterday. John T. Yes, the issue around the claim period for UIF is a good one. So I wasn't aware that there is a maximum period around claiming. My understanding, and I know with both unemployment benefits and maternity benefits, I think you've got 12 months in which to claim. So I'm not sure if there are different rules if someone is claiming with regards to retrenchment. I will double check that. And if there is a claim period attached, what I will do is raise it via NEDLAC, because I think that will be something that will have to be deviated from for at least the next couple of months, because somebody shouldn't be prejudiced from accessing UIF to which they're entitled because the department is delayed in processing TERS. So I will just double check whether that is still the case around a claim window, and then address it. So thanks for raising that.
Excellent, thanks Natalie.
No problem. On the banking details, what happens if there's a group account? Hi Mohammed. So yes, you need to do that group letter. Please, and submit that through to Tsepiso Matapane. What I'm happy to do is that if you want to CC me when you send it to him, it must come from you, but if you want to CC it when you send it, I'll just, I'll see them, and when we get into our 10 o'clock meetings, I'm just aware of how many have gone through. And I can then start just asking some questions around how far they've got. If we're planning to do a 10% reduction in August in an industry that's prohibited at this point, are we able to claim TERS for the 10% cuff? Staff are taking a short time, but we're and in an office, but we are not trading. Okay, so good question, Samuel. What is important, ladies and gentlemen, and this is going to be critical for audit purposes. So if you have formally instituted salary cuts because of economic situations, and many businesses have done that, particularly during the initial parts of lockdown, is they, by agreement with their employees, put in place a reduction, even if it didn't necessarily translate into a reduction of hours. So I know in factory environments, short time generally means short time. So if we take away 20% of your salary, you don't come to work on a Friday, you work 4 days a week. For the rest of us, unfortunately, who are able to work all over, and I don't know about anybody else, but I've actually never worked harder in my life than working at home. I'm probably working 16-hour days most days, and working on weekends, because every single day just seems to be the same as the day before. There's not this very clear Monday to Friday and then the rest of the week. And yet many companies have instituted salary reductions. So if it is a formalized process that you can provide evidence to the department if they ask, I think you can then claim for the basically the income loss for those individuals as a form of support to the individuals. But what I think is problematic potentially is that some employers have not communicated any form of reduction to employees. They're still paying employees in full, but they're claiming TERS. And they're using the TERS money as a form of supplementing income. And I think that could potentially land you in some difficulties in explaining that to the department, because the directive has always been very clear that the TERS benefit is intended to support employees who have lost income as a result of not being able to work, or not being able to work fully, or not earning their full salaries whilst working. So I appreciate it's a kind of a gray area and a fine line, but I think it is absolutely critical that you're very clear about how you've done it. Okay, so if we look at, sorry, I dropped.
Natalie, can I quickly interrupt maybe here before you continue with the chat box? Also knowing that some people might be able to, might need to drop out of the session. I did put your email address there, but I'm also kind of fully aware that there's a lot of you know, you might just be overloaded with emails from people. Do you have a list of, you've mentioned 2 email addresses earlier on, yes. But do you have a list? Because I was looking for that from Makasonke Buteleza months ago. A list of email addresses, not general call center emails that goes up, you know, lost in space, that you can share with me so I can share it with others.
I can, Liezel. What I can tell you too, though, is unfortunately email, they generally disappear into a black hole. So I know you mentioned Sam Mabuza before. He was great for a very short period of time on uFiling and then just disappeared into a black hole. Nombolelo Shabalala was identified as being the person to help you with your bank accounts, but she also just, I don't know if she drowned in her emails. But I think that's part of the problem, is that everybody's going into a situation where there's emails coming out of their ears. And so at this point in time, what my recommendation is, and that's why I think the dispute route is important. I'm waiting for confirmation of who that goes to. I suspect it's got to go to the commissioner, but it's possibly got to go to Advocate Mzi Yawa, who is the signatory to that dispute and is the legal advisor for the UIF. But what I'll do is I'll get what I've got, Liezel, and I'll happily give it to you to share, so that people can communicate directly. So absolutely, what I can do is I can, as I say, where I'm in those sessions representing business, I champion everybody and all the kind of common issues that I can, because unfortunately we've got a list of about 2,500 individual issues that have been raised now over the period of the last 8 weeks. And I think if I can count on one hand how many they've individually come back and responded to. So our biggest goal at the moment is trying to get the UI to commit to telling us what the scope of issues are. So we all are fully aware, as you mentioned, of what the kind of common problems are that people have run into. What we're trying to get them to admit and to publicize is how many
of each of those issues there are, because they should be aware of them based on the system report. And then most importantly, what is the plan? So what is the plan to resolve those issues? I think at the moment, critical will be, as I said, those of you who are having accessibility issues, and particularly if you've got outstanding, you haven't yet been able to make claims for the April and May period, those are absolutely critical to be lodged formally as a dispute. And there I would send them to CIPC and to Viwe. I will share those email addresses with you. All right, so what must be proof of active UIF claims to work in maternity? Again, it's a letter, and again, it's a letter that's unfortunately got to be sent manually through to the department for them to release them. But once you do that, they will then be excluded from TERS. Fixed term employee contract from the 28th of Feb to the 2nd of June. She didn't work in April due to lockdown. She was not paid by the company of who we applied for TERS for her. She's now unemployed. What do we do? She's demanding payments. The company applied for 27 staff as the month of April. Maybe there's two different things. If she had a contract and she wasn't due to be paid for what is essentially March, April, May, she's entitled to TERS for those periods, because if it was not for TERS, she would have been working and earning. So you can claim for TERS for her. I do believe that you could do that. Once her contract is ended, so you wouldn't be able to claim TERS for her for June because she would not have been employed during that period. Company has applied for 27 staffers for April, done a bulk upload and a manual one. To date, we've not received any relief, but have paid our staff in advance. It's difficult to know without seeing, but I think the first question, Janice, needs to be, are those people reflecting on your saved employee screen? If they're not, then there's a problem presumably with how the data's been captured. Otherwise, yeah, as I say, it's a bit difficult without being able to see what you can see on your portal. If you want to get in touch, I'll see if I can try and help. Can we assist with a company's put in the wrong application dates? Okay, so yes, we had several of these and we did come right in getting them reassessed for the full 35-day period. Marizan, those have to be escalated to Alan Rugalavu. So if you want to drop me an email, I will share his details with you and the process you need to follow to ask for a relook based on an accidental incorrect date period. Employees were told that they're not eligible to claim for maternity because we claimed TERS for April. Again, it's got to be released. So it's if they're now on maternity, you would release them and you wouldn't be claiming for them under TERS and for maternity. 6 weeks single application, will this mean 46 days? Yes, it will. So it will be 46 days, 31 for July, 15 for August. So that's correct. So what happens if a person earns less than 3,500 because they're a part-time worker 2 days a week only? Okay, so this is the anomaly. And so what would happen is if a person's a 2 day a week only, let's say they earn 200 Rand a day for ease of maths, that person is going to be earning probably 1,600 Rand on average a month. So you would declare the 1,600, and again, if you're paying them their full 1,600, you don't claim TERS for them. So it's not intended as a way of somebody getting more money. But if that person is, for example, your domestic worker who hasn't returned to work, then you would apply for them, and that individual will be eligible for the 3,500 Rand from the department, and you are to pay them the 3,500 Rand, even though it is more than what they earn. And the logic that the department has applied in that case is saying that somebody who is a part-time worker probably works for more than one employer, and only one employer can claim TERS on their behalf. So they're assuming that they would be earning from you potentially for 2 days a week and from someone else for 2 or 3 days a week. So they're trying to just ensure that those individuals receive at least the 3,500 Rand minimum. We've advanced staff based on what has been paid in the past. Will this negatively impact staff now as we send the advance pop to TERS? No, because remember, an advance is not income. So what you're doing there is just showing what you've paid out to the employees based on what your understanding of the calculation was. What happens if your April hasn't been processed yet and you want to apply? So yes, as I say, don't submit proof of payment, Alan. You need to upload a letter of complaint that your April hasn't been sorted. I'd also be interested, Alan, to try and understand why April hasn't been processed yet. There must be a problem with the application. So I'm happy to have a look at that. Who do we submit the dispute to? Well, as I said, we're still waiting on that. In the absence of any formal information, my recommendation will be to send it to teboho.marapeng@labour.gov.za. That's the UI Commissioner. Right. Banking verification cleared off the system. Oh, good news, Mane. When will May and June claims be processed? They are processing on a daily basis, so hopefully not too long from now. Funds were paid into the bank more than 10 days ago, but the payment breakdown is not available. Sure, that's a technical challenge. We have had that with a couple of employers before. So, Mohammed, you need to drop a mail to viwe.goli, and so it's GQOLI. So it's viwe, viwe.gqoli, viwe.goli@labour.gov.za, and ask him to check into that.
Okay, thanks.
If you were short paid for May and we resubmitted for people not paid in May, is that allowed? Will it be paid? Yes. So just a note on that. If you ever add people to your May claim, please don't confuse the system by adding a single CSV that includes the other people. So if you're going to make a secondary submission, if there are a handful of people, add them manually. Far better than trying to go the CSV route. If you have to go the CSV route due to size, then what I strongly recommend is that you have a new CSV file for that period that only includes people who are new, in inverted commas, and you just change the date on that file and upload it. I think if you add it where it has other people who are on the system, I think it generally gets confused and assumes that it's a repetition. With bank verification, can different trade names be a delay in payout? Yes, it is possible. So I think part of this process on the verification is that they have undertaken, Sonia, to contact everybody where this is the case. What you might want to do is go back in the slides and perhaps send an email to Tsipiso Matapane and just say, this is the case. We accidentally loaded our trade name incorrectly. This is the correct details. It corresponds with the bank confirmation. So there isn't any worry about fraud. Please, can you assist? We want to claim the amount we short paid the employees. Will this be the full month only for the 15 days as TERS closes? Okay, so again, what you're doing is you're going to declare their normal remuneration in the monthly column. That doesn't change. So although it's for a 6-week period, the field asks for their normal monthly remuneration, which shouldn't really have changed over this period of time because a person is earning what a person's earning. Then, so you never include the reduced time, by the way. So some people made that mistake. So let's say my normal salary was 20 grand. For the period of lockdown, my company said they were only going to pay me 15. You should still have declared my normal remuneration as 20. And then my payment as 15. So my rent received for the period as 15. For the 6-week period, what you will be doing is you will be declaring what they would earn. It's a good question, and I actually want to check that with them tomorrow. So, you know, where we were only talking about 3 extra days in the first period, it was really insignificant. But you've asked a very good question, Venetia. So I'm going to write that down. And I need to check with them, because if you gave in the answer that was for 6 weeks worth, it could potentially prejudice the value of what they pay out. I'm going to ask that question, and I will then come back to Liezel, who can share with you. Locked TERS account, definitely viwe, because, and you need to declare a dispute, please, because you don't want to be left out in the cold. System states progress several weeks. Yeah, so May is a very serious problem, and I don't know why they haven't gone back. So I think we do need to start making some noise about May. blank error descriptions basically mean that they're sitting there and they haven't yet been processed. So there isn't a problem per se, but if it's been there for a long time, then the issue is probably that application period hasn't been looked at for a while. You're absolutely entitled to the slide deck, no problem, Melanie. I'll share it with Liezel and she can onward share it with you with pleasure. Extended period, new direction. We're a service delivery employer, not servicing many customers due to them not operating or fully operational. Would you recommend we apply and leave it to UIF to decide, as the short time is based on operational limitations? No, I think is on if your company cannot operate, or your as a service delivery employer, you probably got consultants who cannot deliver their services, and as a result income is severely compromised. I think you would be in a position, if requested, to show the impact. So I use the example of a training business. So I mean, you know, if somebody came and said, oh, but you also do other things, we say, yes, we do, but have a look. I mean, in the 4 months, we lost 5 million Rand, for argument's sake. I mean, it's very clearly there. And you could be able to argue it. So it's the secondary industries in particular where I think that's going to be the case. So, you know, if restaurants and hotels are not operating, and I'm somebody who washes tablecloths, I'm a laundry, and my key business is servicing the hospitality and restaurant industry, and they're not operating, or they're operating on much lower volumes, that's going to have an immediate, direct and tangible impact on my business. In which case, I think you would be well within your rights to apply. Okay, uFiling is blocked. Okay, yes, sorry, I didn't mention. We've got a great system going with Interfile. So we've created a great relationship with Interfile. What they've done for us, and they've been exceptional in coming back. They can't always resolve every issue because they're sometimes reliant on the UIF, but where they can, they're great. So we've got a very simple process that we've set up, a structured way in which to lodge your issue. So this is my blockage, provide the relevant information. My colleague Sammy collates those on a daily basis, puts them into the agreed format, submits it to Interfile, and every single day we receive a response from Interfile. They've asked for a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time as a maximum, and generally within a day they come back with feedback. So they speak to you directly and guide you on what needs to happen, and they also give feedback to us, which we then share with everybody who is part of that process. So if you do have a uFiling challenge, then the best thing to do is you can send an email directly to Sammy. We've got a dedicated address. It's c19ters@globalbusiness.co.za, and she would be able to then just drop her a line and say, please send me the information about uFiling assistance, and she will gladly send that to you. As I said, the Interfile team, I cannot thank them more highly. I think they, like most of us, have been extremely frustrated in this process because they've inherited, I think, a large part of the UIF's problems, because the UIF has just kind of pushed everything over to them, and the system was just not built to deal with the volumes and to deal with large employers. So they've done the best they can, and as I said, wherever they're able to, they have most certainly assisted our clients and our employers. So yeah, that brings us to the end of the questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really do hope that it helps. And if there is anything more that we can assist you with, we certainly will. As promised, Liezel, I'll send you these slides in PDF format, as well as those addresses. And yeah, Godspeed to everybody. I really hope that you all get all the money that you are due, and that we can all leave the TERS vortex, hopefully nearly as sane as we began. I certainly have got grayer with the process, but have learned a lot along the way and got to meet a lot of people. So thank you very much, Liezel, and to all of your network partners.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you for being here, Natalie, again, and for all your insights and taking some of these unresolved issues, you know, further, and feedback. Just a question, you've mentioned something that you are hosting webinars, etc. Is it kind of one-way webinars, practical like this one, open space?
I'm just kind of trying to see if there might be a need for some of the people that want to plug into what you already have with regards to TERS and UIF.
Sure, no problem. So what I'll do is when I drop you the mail, Liezel, I'll just share some of the things that we are doing. Part of the TERS kind of falls into we have a COVID support service that we've been offering clients since lockdown. We do morning webinars Monday, Wednesday, Friday, not just on COVID, although obviously central currently around COVID, but generally HR, labor relations, best practice and right sizing and design thinking and all kinds of things related to just kind of figure out the new normal. And UIF and TERS obviously features as a very central and common theme. So I can send you some information about that so that if anybody's interested, they can get in contact with Cynthia in our office, who would be able to give them guidance on that.
Okay. If you don't mind, there's another question that I quickly want to ask. Many companies, and we talked about this yesterday, are facing, strikes and breakdown in trust, etc. And some of them kind of asked me, is there anybody that they can get from the department to come and talk to the people? Because we're not seeing that narrative in the media. And explain this. What have you kind of been doing in that case where relationships and trust have been broken down? And, I know one of the people are actually in this room, and she's one of many, where they've done everything, transparency, showed the emails, she went into the uFiling into her system to show them, and that is still not helping. What do you suggest?
So yeah, unfortunately, and I think this is what is most frustrating for me, is that, unfortunately we live in a world where politics dictates the narrative. And so what is said in the media and what we know to be the truth in practice are not the same. So the transparency, the communication is critical. What some of our clients have done is they've arranged a session where they've called in, for example, employee representatives or shop stewards, and they've got me to present, for example, and just share some updates. And again, it's not necessarily going to resolve the issue immediately, but the level of independence and the ability for me to speak from experience of actually sitting in the B4SA and sharing the fact that it's not just that company, others are in a similar boat, and where we can provide that kind of feedback and guidance, that has helped. But again, I think that's the biggest challenge we're all going to face, is how do we repair the relationships which unfortunately have become exceptionally strained? And you can understand why. I mean, when individuals are in a place where generally we're all feeling out of sorts with not being able to do what we normally do, the uncertainty around our health and well-being, our children, and are they going to get back to school or not get back to school? And then for those that literally don't have money to put bread on the table, it's highly stressful. And so I think really communication is critical, trust, and we keep pushing at Business for South Africa for the department to be more open in their communications. Today there was a request. Request is probably a polite word. I think it may be not quite strongly a demand, but it's heading in that fashion, is for there to be a very clear communication that comes out around delays in payments, around the now new delays which are being experienced around the risk and fraud. And that for me is also worrisome, because it implies and kind of further feeds into this narrative, because if an employee logs in and sees an amount, and then there's a flag that says this company has been flagged for fraud assessment or risk assessment, it almost feeds into that narrative. I think one of the biggest issues, apart from the delay in payment, is the fact that employees just really haven't understood, and maybe this is our fault as employers, is we've tried really hard to accommodate employees by paying them up front and giving them advances, but I'm not sure that we've been explicitly clear enough that that's essentially a loan against the TERS value, and that when the TERS money comes in, the business will keep that money to offset the loan.
Because we've seen this, and especially in trade unionized environments where there's been a demand that they want the TERS money in addition to what has already been paid to them. And there it's critical to inform them that they're not entitled to that. In one particular client's case where we did have a pending strike, I'd engaged with them, and we managed to get a Department of Labour official to also come and explain to them that actually they weren't entitled to the full TERS money. And that was particularly around the April claims, where the department obviously paid out maximum to everyone, and then expected to the employer to do the recon and refund the department what was overpaid. So in those cases, you know, it was helpful to get the department there. But yeah, I don't think that we're going to necessarily, we shouldn't be holding on in expectation that the department's going to admit publicly where they've come short. I just don't see it happening from a political point of view. And that's the sad part, is that unfortunately as business, we need to do what we do. From a Business for South Africa point of view, we will continue to provide as much transparent feedback as possible from a collective source and an independent source that can help to support individual employers to be able to, you know, further support that. It's not just us, it's not just me as the company saying this. You can see that Business for South Africa said that this is affecting, you know, many employers. And in fact, I will speak to my colleagues at B4SA tomorrow morning in our meeting, and just maybe recommend that we do think about putting out some kind of a correspondence ourselves, regardless of whether the department does what we've asked them to or not. Just as a form of support and guidance.
Just on that point, if I look at when I reach out to the Minister of Labour, actually on Twitter, and that's something that I said to people in these groups from the beginning. I mean, it's terrible when it gets to that, but Twitter is actually where your source of information is. And, you know, it was suggested to me by the two marketing and communications director to send that letter, which I did, you know, officially and through the channels, and it was acknowledged. You know, I sent it to the minister and to them on email as well. But then not long after that, I saw, and I can't remember if it was NIASA, that had an official letter about UIF and TERS in the public domain on Twitter, you know, tagging and hashtagging and whatever. And I was kind of thinking, shouldn't I have done the same thing? And that's very part of the problem. You know, the only thing out there on Twitter, for example, in NCA News, is the narrative about employers not paying. And, you know, maybe we should have countered that by putting this officially on the public domain so that people can see and change that narrative. And maybe that while we're waiting for a formal dispute, you know, where do we send these formal disputes? My accountant always says paper is patient when she talks about such, you know, whatever, you know, put something out there so that it is there, that you've lodged it, even though we don't know where to send the formal disputes yet.
Yeah, Liezel, you're so right. And I think, you know, I come from a marketing and comms background in my first iteration of life. And it frustrates me endlessly because I'm a doer. And I think we chatted about that yesterday. So I'm not an overtly political creature. I've learned to be. I was the CEO of a professional body for nearly a decade, and I still serve at an industry level, and now of course on these forums. And so I'm very practical, and I want to shout from the media and from the rooftops and say, you know, these guys are not playing the game. But my more experienced and patient colleagues are the ones who understand the long game, which requires, unfortunately, this sort of political correctness. And I think we actually have got to that point now, Liezel, though, that I think once this directive is signed, I think the gloves are going to have to come off, which is why we are talking about taking legal action. We've already got one case that's gone to, it's awaiting judgment as we speak. And I think it's got to get to that point. So I think for now, what everybody's going to have to do is they're going to have to formally invoke that clause 28, because the polite way of asking for help hasn't happened. Whenever we start, we've written to the DG, we've written to the minister, and as soon as you do that, you know, it does put some fire under some bums for a short period of time. But at the same time, what happens is that the people from the UI that we're working with on a daily basis start to become quite resentful and obstructive, because now you've ratted them out to their boss. It's kind of like CCing in the owner. You know, we will get to that point sometimes with a provider or somebody, and we CC in the boss to get them moving. And it has, of course, the desired effect for the minute, but it does potentially damage the relationship. But I do think once this direction is in place, we are now saying to employers, everybody needs to stand up. We've tried the polite way, we've tried to channel it as per their requests through a central source, and yet nothing's happening. But what I will tell you, which is so wonderful to see, is that our colleagues from organized labor, and that's across the spectrum, they now fully understand that this is not employers. They are experiencing it themselves, because we've got, as I said, we've got colleagues within the labor movement who are actually facilitating claims on behalf of employers and members. And they are seeing themselves that the problems are in fact with the UI. We've seen statements, for example, last week by Matthew Parks from COSATU, who's also called out the process and called out the minister and the commissioner. So I think if there's one good thing that will come out of this, is I think it has brought organized business and organized labor closer to one another in recognizing how important collaboration is, and transparency and openness in working for a common goal. And that really is to make sure that people get what's due to them, that they have money on the table to feed their families, and that businesses and employers can continue to work together so that we can rebuild our economy and our country. It's absolutely essential. So I do think that the gloves will come off now. We will give you guidance on how you can help yourselves, but also help us as a collective in actually now forcing the UI to act, because I think that's what's got to happen now. So yes, publicly I think is one thing, and there are always platforms, and I think NIASA is quite well known for that. They clients of ours, we work with them as well. They're part of our webinars. So they're known to be that very loud, objective voice, and that's great. We all need that. But at the same time, I think we've kind of got to do what we need to do to make things happen. So I continue to do all that I can, where I can, to get things moving. I'm probably not I'm not the favorite of the UIF, because I am the one that calls them out in the meetings. I'm not overly politically sensitive, and I'll continue to do that. And then, as I say, we will provide everyone we can with the tools that are at their disposal, so that they can also help to put a collective pressure on the UI to come to bear. And I think what will happen as a result of that is, when we start seeing multiple disputes being lodged and a failure on the part of the UIF, because unfortunately I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think they have the capacity to come back to everybody if everybody suddenly started putting in their disputes and they've got 5 days to come back. That is then very newsworthy, and I think will be picked up in the media, that it's actually got to a point where companies are now formally declaring disputes, and the UI is incapable of responding to those.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so we'll keep in close touch over the next couple of days. But again, really please, the primary objective for everybody around April and May is, please make sure that your claims are in. And if you are one of those that has got accessibility issues, I'm very happy if you raise that with me. We did escalate a whole lot yesterday to vWare on a centralized spreadsheet. So I will very gladly add yours to that list, which we expect them to report back on. But I will need it sooner rather than later, because they don't like it when we spring stuff on them. So if you can drop me a mail with, and what I will need is, I'll need to have UIF reference number, the entity's name, what your problem is in very short English. So we got locked out, or we can't access it, we've never been able to access it, we want to gain control back. And then the contact information, which will be a name, an email address, and a cell phone number, so that the UI can contact you directly to engage with you about releasing your profile.
Okay, that is very valuable advice, because I'm fully aware that it's the 28th. and that we want to do as much as we need to do before the end of July.
Yeah.
Okay, Natalie, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Being open space, I always say, and we always do, is that it ends, whoever needs to be here or the people that needs to be here, and we finish when we are done. And we never finish before 90 minutes, sometimes 2 hours, especially if it's TERS, it's 2 hours. I know that.
TERS is a time-consuming effort, but thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Absolutely wonderful. So if you do need to jump off, I fully understand. And I see there are quite a number of people that's still in the room. And even Natalie, if you need to run off and people kind of need to feel.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
I do understand that you need to run. So thank you a lot. And if anybody wants to kind of stay here and they still have a burning question or they just need someone to talk to, I'm leaving it open. Okay.
Thank you, Liezel. It was a very good session, and I think the information really helps us, and we see where we stand, and you know we're not alone with these issues and things like that. And it is a little concerning that if the claims, like for May and April, will end now at the end of July, because I mean we sit and we get through to the call center and they say they're escalated, but it really we still sit with the same issues week after week. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. So there's something that you know that what you can do. You know, there's a few email addresses that Natalie mentioned, or things that you can kind of unblock, and failing which, you know, send in an email with those specific details that you asked for, that she can, you know, take this to the UIF. So whatever, you know, we can still do to help.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here, Alexa. I'll see you back again.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm just going to finish this recording.